11 co-workers watched my sister-in-law hand me a folder meant to end my marriage. 30 seconds later, I recognized every message inside, because I'd written half of them myself, for a birthday party she'd been invited to. My name is Jack Clark. I'm 34 years old, an architect at a mid-sized design firm in Charlotte, North Carolina, and for 6 years I've been married to a woman named Josephine, the kind of woman who makes ordinary Tuesdays feel worth showing up for. I built my career on precision. Every line I draw has a reason behind it. Every structure I design has to hold weight it was never meant to show. I didn't know that Tuesday would test whether I could hold weight the same way. That morning, I was prepping for the Ashford account, a client walkthrough that had taken 4 months of revisions to get right. I stood in the glass-walled conference room, straightening my tie in the dark reflection of a monitor, running through talking points in my head. Steady. That's the word people use to describe me. Calm under pressure. I've always taken pride in that. My phone buzzed. Josephine. Hey, quick thing, she said, her voice a little too light. Renata's going to swing by your office with lunch. I felt something tighten in my chest before I could name why. Renata, Josephine's younger sister, 7 months pregnant, and someone who had never once, in 6 years, brought me lunch. Renata, who still hadn't forgiven me for the loan we didn't give her 2 years ago. Renata, who smiled at family dinners with a warmth that never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. That's nice of her, I said, because what else do you say? Just be nice, okay? She's been stressed with the pregnancy. A pause. Love you. I set the phone down and looked out at the bullpen. Priya at her desk, Trevor 2 rows back, Ms. Holloway's office door cracked open like it always was. Everything looked normal. Everything looked like a Tuesday. I didn't know yet that Renata wasn't bringing lunch at all. I didn't know she was bringing a folder that would try to end my marriage in front of everyone I worked with, and that by the end of the day, I wouldn't be the one who needed to explain myself. Renata arrived at 11:15, cradling a paper bag from a bakery 2 blocks from our building, wearing a coat too warm for the weather and a smile too practiced for the occasion. She'd never once visited my office. Not for my birthday, not for the day I made partner track, not even the week Josephine and I moved into our first house together. Special delivery, she said, loud enough for the row of desks nearest the elevator to hear. I stood to greet her, and I noticed how the room shifted around her. Priya glancing up from her screen, 2 junior designers pausing mid-conversation, the particular kind of attention a pregnant woman commands without trying. Renata knew it too. She'd always known how to make an entrance. It was the exiting gracefully part she struggled with. She didn't hand me the bakery bag. She handed me a manila folder, its edges slightly bent like it had been carried in a purse for days, waiting for the right stage. This isn't from Josephine, I said. It wasn't a question. Open it, she said, and there was something underneath her smile now, something closer to hunger. I thought about the loan. 2 years ago, at her lowest, she'd asked us for $40,000 to save a boutique fitness studio that was already 3 months behind on rent. I was the one who ran the numbers. I was the one who told Josephine it wasn't a loan, it was a loss we'd never see again. Josephine listened to me. Renata never forgave either of us for it, but especially me, the outsider who'd apparently convinced her sister to abandon her. I hadn't thought about that afternoon in months. Standing there with the folder in my hands, I understood, with the cold clarity of a foundation crack you don't notice until the whole wall shifts, that she hadn't forgotten either. Go ahead, Renata said again, and behind her, through the glass of her office door, I saw Ms. Holloway look up. I opened the folder in front of 11 people who had no idea they were about to become witnesses. Inside were printed screenshots, a text conversation between me and Priya, our senior designer, stretched across 4 pages with certain lines highlighted in yellow. Can't wait for tonight. Just the 2 of us. Don't tell anyone yet. My stomach dropped before my brain caught up to what I was looking at. I just think, Renata said, her voice pitched for the room now, not for me, that Josephine deserves to know who she actually married. Someone near the printer made a small, sharp sound, not quite a gasp but close. Priya's chair rolled back an inch. I felt heat crawl up the back of my neck, the particular heat of being accused of something you didn't do, which is somehow worse than the heat of being caught doing something you did. I made myself look at the pages instead of at the room. Just the two of us. Don't tell anyone yet. I read it twice, and something in my memory clicked, faint and distant, like hearing your name called in another language. This is from March, I said quietly, more to myself than to her. Convenient timing to remember dates, Renata said. I didn't answer. My hands weren't shaking. I want to say that plainly, because for one long moment I thought they would. Instead, they went very still, the way they do when I'm looking at a blueprint that doesn't add up, searching for the load-bearing wall someone forgot to draw in. Across the room, Ms. Halloway stepped out of her office, her expression unreadable, and said, "Let's take this somewhere else." Nobody moved. Renata's eyes were bright, victorious, and beneath that, for just a flicker, something like fear, like she'd already gone further than she meant to. March. The word sat in my chest like a stone dropping through water, and then, all at once, I remembered. It wasn't an affair. It was Josephine's 33rd birthday. Priya had helped me plan it for 6 weeks, a surprise dinner with 20 of Josephine's closest friends, a private room at the restaurant where we'd had our first date. Can't wait for tonight. Just the two of us. Don't tell anyone yet. Priya had sent that message about slipping away from the office early to pick up the cake. Just the two of us, meant her and the bakery owner, coordinating the final pickup while I handled the guest list. I remembered laughing about the phrasing at the time. Priya had said, half joking, that if anyone read it out of context it'd sound like a scandal. I hadn't imagined anyone actually would. Standing there with the folder shaking almost imperceptibly in my grip, I felt something colder than embarrassment settle in. These messages hadn't been discovered. They'd been harvested, pulled from a group chat that included Josephine's best friend, Renata herself, and 3 others, spliced and reordered to remove every trace of context. Dates trimmed off. Replies from other people deleted. Someone had done this with intention, with patience, the way you don't do something out of a single moment of anger but out of weeks of waiting for the right one. I kept my voice level. This is from Josephine's birthday planning. You were in that group chat, Renata. You know exactly what this is. For half a second, something flickered across her face. Not guilt exactly, but the recognition of someone realizing the ground beneath her was thinner than she'd accounted for. Take this somewhere else, Ms. Halloway repeated, sharper now, stepping fully into the bullpen. Nobody moved. And that's when Priya, still seated, said quietly, "I can explain everything. All of it." While Priya gathered herself to speak, my mind went somewhere else entirely. 2 years back, to a dinner table in my in-laws' dining room, candlelight throwing long shadows across a room that had gone suddenly, uncomfortably quiet. Renata had just pitched the loan. $40,000 for a boutique fitness studio that hadn't turned a profit in 8 months. She'd looked at Josephine when she asked. Not at me, because she already understood I'd be the obstacle. I remember laying out the numbers as gently as I could, the studio's lease terms, the debt already accumulated, the math that simply didn't work no matter how you angled it. I wasn't cruel about it. I was precise, the way I am with everything, because precision was the only language I trusted to keep emotion from making the decision for us. Josephine agreed with me. That was the part Renata never got past. Not that I'd said no, but that her own sister had looked at my spreadsheet and chosen it over her. The studio closed 4 months later. Renata never mentioned the loan again, not directly. But something in her shifted permanently that night, the way she introduced me at family gatherings as Josephine's husband, the architect, instead of by name, the small comments about how controlling engineers and architects can be, always delivered with a laugh that didn't quite land as a joke. I told myself it would fade. Grief and resentment don't always announce themselves, sometimes they just wait, quietly reorganizing themselves into something sharper. Standing in that conference room 2 years later, watching her face as Priya prepared to unravel everything she'd built, I understood I hadn't misjudged her feelings. I'd only misjudged how long she was willing to wait, and how far she was willing to go, to make sure I paid for a decision I still believed, even now, had been the right one. Priya stood, smoothing her blazer, and addressed the room with a composure I hadn't expected given the circumstances. "Those messages are from March," she said. "I was helping Jack plan Josephine's birthday party. That text about just the two of us, I meant myself and the bakery owner. I was picking up the cake while Jack finalized the guest list. Renata was in that group chat. She got the invitation like everyone else." The room's attention swung toward Renata like a compass finding north. I watched her shoulders draw inward, almost imperceptibly, the posture of someone recalculating in real time. "That's not," she started. "I still have the original thread," Priya said, pulling out her phone, her voice steady but not unkind. "Dates, replies, everyone else's messages. Nothing's been deleted on my end." Renata's mouth opened, then closed. And then, in the silence that followed, she said something she clearly hadn't meant to say out loud. "I know it was the birthday thing. I was there. She stopped herself half a second too late. The words hung in the air, small and devastating. "I know it was the birthday thing. Not, I didn't realize. Not, I misunderstood." She'd known the truth the entire time and brought the folder anyway. Ms. Holloway's expression hardened into something I hadn't seen from her before. Not anger exactly, but the particular stillness of someone recalculating everything they thought they understood about a situation. The bullpen had gone fully silent now, the kind of silence that has weight to it, that presses against your ears. Renata's confidence, so certain minutes ago, had started to crack visibly, a hairline fracture spreading across a surface that had looked solid from a distance. She glanced toward the folder still in my hands, then toward the door, as if calculating whether this was a room she could still walk out of with any version of her story intact. It wasn't. Not anymore. And I still didn't understand where she'd gotten those screenshots to begin with. Not until I looked past her, toward the desks near the printer, and saw Trevor watching very carefully, and not moving at all. Something about Trevor's stillness caught my attention the way a hairline crack catches your eye on a wall you've walked past 100 times. You don't notice it until the light hits it just right. I looked back down at the folder. On the printed header of the first page, barely visible, was a routing stamp, the kind our office system automatically stamps on anything sent to the shared printer. Sent from T. Whitfield. Trevor. I felt the pieces reassemble themselves with an unpleasant clarity. 6 weeks ago, I'd been promoted to lead architect on the Ashford account, the promotion Trevor had spent 2 years angling for, the one he'd mentioned more than once, in that tight, joking not joking way people use when they're actually furious. He'd congratulated me in the break room with a handshake that lasted half a second too long. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. People get passed over. Most of them are professional about it. But someone had pulled those messages from a group chat Trevor wasn't even part of, which meant he'd gotten them from someone who was. And Renata, resentful, pregnant, primed and waiting for a reason to believe the worst of me, was exactly the kind of person you'd hand a loaded folder to if you wanted the damage done without your fingerprints on it. "Renata," I said slowly, "who gave you these?" She didn't answer right away, and in the gap before she did, I watched Trevor's eyes flick toward the exit, just once. Just for a second, the reflex of a man calculating distance. "Someone from your office," Renata finally admitted, quieter now than she'd been all morning. "He said you'd been talking about her behind Josephine's back for months. He said he felt bad not telling someone." The routing stamp was still there in my hand, small and undeniable, the kind of detail that changes an entire structure once you finally see it. "Trevor," I said, loud enough this time for the whole room, "you want to explain the printer log?" Trevor's face did something I'll remember for a long time, the particular collapse of a person who believed, right up until the last second, that they'd covered every angle. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice had lost the flatness of a lie told with confidence. It had the wobble of one told in a panic. Ms. Holloway crossed the room in 4 sharp steps. "The printer log timestamps every job with an employee ID, Trevor. It's not a guess." She turned to one of the junior designers. "Pull it. Now." I laid it out plainly, the way I'd walk a client through a set of blueprints. No theatrics, just the sequence. Trevor had access to the shared drive where Josephine's birthday planning thread had been archived months ago, forwarded there by a mutual friend for photo backup. He'd have needed to search, screenshot, and crop deliberately. This wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding, it was hours of quiet, patient work. Then he'd found Renata, someone he'd likely never met in person, through Josephine's social media, and reached out with a story engineered to hit exactly where it would hurt most. "You didn't even know her," I said. "You just needed someone angry enough to deliver it." Renata stood very still, and I watched the full weight of it land on her. Not just that she'd been wrong, but that she'd been used, handed a weapon by a stranger who understood her grievances better than her own family had bothered to. Her humiliation, which minutes earlier had been aimed entirely at me, turned inward, and her face went pale in a way that had nothing to do with the pregnancy. "I didn't know," she said, and for the first time all morning, I believed her. Ms. Holloway didn't wait for HR to arrive before saying it out loud. "Trevor, gather your things. You're suspended, pending review." The junior designer confirmed the printer log a moment later. Trevor's ID, 9:47 that morning, 4 pages, color. Nobody in the bullpen said a word as he walked out. Josephine arrived 11 minutes later, out of breath, her coat still half-buttoned, having driven straight from her office the moment I called her. She scanned the room, Renata pale and silent near the reception desk, Trevor's empty chair, Ms. Holloway on the phone with HR, and I watched her put the pieces together faster than I expected. "Someone want to explain what happened?" she asked, but her eyes were already on Renata, not me. That, more than anything, told me something had shifted. I gave her the short version. She listened without interrupting, arms crossed, and when I finished, she turned to her sister with an expression I hadn't seen her wear before. Not anger exactly, more like exhausted disappointment, the kind reserved for people you've forgiven too many times already. "You brought this to his job," Josephine said quietly. "In front of everyone. Without asking me first." "I thought I was protecting you," Renata said, and her voice cracked on the last word. "You didn't check with me. You didn't check with him. You just believed the version that made you feel justified." Josephine's voice stayed level, but I could hear what it cost her to keep it that way. Renata didn't have a response for that. She pressed a hand to her stomach, sat down heavily in the chair beside Ms. Holloway's office, and, for the first time since she'd walked in that morning, looked genuinely afraid. Not of me, but of what she'd just done to her relationship with her sister. Josephine crossed the room and sat beside me instead, her hand finding mine under the edge of the conference table, fingers laced through mine the way they had been on our wedding day. She didn't say anything else out loud. She didn't need to. It was the first quiet moment either of us had had in over an hour, and it was the only one that mattered. 3 weeks passed before Renata and I sat in the same room again, and even then, it wasn't easy. A stiff, careful dinner at her parents' house, conversation moving around the incident like water around a stone too heavy to lift. She apologized once, briefly, in the kitchen while I was refilling my water glass. "I should have asked you first. I should have asked anyone first." I told her I accepted it, and I meant it, mostly for Josephine's sake, and mostly because the baby coming in 6 weeks deserved a family that could at least sit at the same table without flinching. Trevor's suspension turned into a termination 2 weeks later, after HR confirmed what the printer log had already made obvious. I heard through a colleague that he was already interviewing at a competing firm across town, spinning some version of events where he was the wronged party. I wasn't surprised. People like Trevor rarely leave quietly, and they almost never leave without rewriting the story first. Josephine and I didn't talk about the birthday folder much after that first week. Some things you process out loud, and some things you just carry until they get lighter on their own. What did change, quietly and permanently, was the way she spoke about Renata to her mother, the way she stopped smoothing over her sister's comments about me at family dinners. Something in the architecture of our marriage had shifted, load-bearing walls I hadn't realized needed reinforcing until the whole structure was tested. That evening, sitting alone on our porch as the sky went the color of a fading bruise, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. A single message: "You think this is over? Ask Trevor what he's planning next." I stared at it for a long moment, then set the phone face down on the railing beside me, unsure yet whether I was looking at an ending or the first sentence of something else entirely. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like and share for more interesting stories.